Cosmic Secrets and the Bizarre Tale of the Urantia Book, August 20, 2019. Throughout human history there have been those who claim to have channeled the superior knowledge of heavenly or divine beings, many of which have ended up in volumes of texts for us to examine and try to understand, looking for some meaning in this chaotic cosmos we call home. Cosmic Secrets and the Bizarre Tale of the Urantia Book. One of these very strange texts appeared in the 1950s, intended to give glimpses of secrets beyond our imagination, and whose content remains controversial and the authorship is unknown to this day. The incredibly strange story in the book, known only as the Urantia Book, is supposed to begin in 1911, when a couple of doctors in Chicago, William and Lena Sadler, were approached by a woman who had a strange story to tell. She claimed that her husband went into a deep and strange trance from which he could not be awakened and during which he would seem possessed by external forces. The Sadlers went to observe the man during these episodes, and indeed he seemed to be conveying verbal messages from spiritual beings he called student visitors, which would then be recorded on paper until there were voluminous transcriptions of these alleged communications. Sadler was deeply skeptical at first, as he had been a demystifier of psychic powers and spiritual mediumship for a long time, and in 1929 even wrote a book about how he found everything fraudulent, entitled The Mind at Mischief. In Mischief. However, in this case, he says he found that he was compelled and unable to come up with a rational explanation for what he and his wife had witnessed, one of only 2 cases he had ever encountered that he could not explain by writing. The other exception has to do with a rather peculiar case of psychic phenomena, which I consider myself unable to classify. I was put in contact with him in the summer of 1911, and I have had this under my observation since then, having been present at probably 250 of the evening sessions, many of which were attended by a stenographer who took large notes. A thorough study of this case has convinced me that it is not a common trance. This man is totally unconscious, totally oblivious to what happens, and unless informed about it subsequently, he never knows that he was used as a sort of clearinghouse for the coming and going of supposed extraplanetary personalities. Psychoanalysis, hypnotism, and intensive comparison cannot show that the written or spoken messages of this individual originate in his own mind. Much of the material provided by this subject is totally contrary to his thinking habits, the way he was taught, and all his philosophy. In fact, from much of what we have achieved, we cannot find anything of its nature. The Sadlers would spend many sessions with this mysterious individual, becoming increasingly convinced that something really strange was going on. The patient caught the attention of a group of Sadler's friends, who also came to watch these sessions after reading some of the transcripts, and at one point the entities that spoke through the man invited them to ask any questions they wanted. The group consisted of 30 people who called themselves He Forum and ended up asking hundreds of questions to these beings, recording all their answers. It is the original transcripts and answers to these questions that would inevitably be compiled in what came to be called the Urantia Book, with Urantia being the entity's name for Earth. In 1925, the Forum made a promise not to discuss what they learned from the outside world, and the manuscript was largely hidden, revised and added over the years with further communication with the spirits, in some cases even having sections integers supposedly just magically coming out of nowhere. This would last for decades, with the book growing and being expanded and revised as these celestial entities were contacted through the original medium, although the subject's identity was kept completely secret, until in 1955 permission to publish was granted by the spiritual beings with whom they were supposedly in contact. The Urantia Book was then finally released by a specifically tax-free educational society in the state of Illinois called the Urantia Foundation. The copyright of the material would become public domain in 2006 and it has been widely published by others ever since. Now that we have the origins of this bizarre enlightened book, you may be wondering what it really is. And this is a rather strange story in itself. The Urantia Book is more or less essentially a very long mishmash, often baffled by spiritualism, philosophy, and pseudoscience, covering such topics as the nature of the universe, the origins of humanity, the meaning of life, the nature of God, and the very nature of God. Universe, the life of Jesus, a very bizarre and elaborate alternate history of the Earth, a cosmology of extraterrestrial spiritual beings, and an extensive reflection on the relationship between God and human beings. It's all too detailed and long to really go into too much detail here, but among the book's many revelations there is a multiverse and superuniverse, that Jesus is the most important spirit in this universe and shares much of his wisdom in other sources, although it is alleged here that he was born of natural means of conception rather than a virgin birth and did not perform any of the miracles credited to him in the Bible, and that God is a being who works on various levels of reality. There are also references to other celestial beings and entities. Everything is presented in an extremely long and detailed text filled with countless illustrations, and is totally incomprehensible at first glance, and everything is presented as an authoritarian fact. Of course, considering the manuscript's apparent paranormal source and its supernatural claims, there has been a lot of skepticism in its path, and none of this is helped by the fact that many of the scientific facts it presents are wrong, and much of it is a product of his time, not agreeing with the assumption that it comes from omnipotent advanced beings. However, this did not prevent the book's popularity from spreading. In the 1970s, the Urantia book was popular with musicians, and has adherents to this day, some who literally believe it, with some plumbers claiming to still be in contact with the entities responsible for the original texts, and others who think that it is truth disguised as fiction, open to interpretation and demanding that we think about it. Still others consider it to be nothing more than purely a form of science fiction, historical fiction or fantasy, although it is very well thought out, with skeptic Martin Gardner calling it highly imaginative, with cosmology that surpasses the fantasy of any science fiction work known to me. Less positive reviews come from a skeptic who says that everything is fascinating, inspiring, attractive, hunting, fun, annoying, incomprehensible and always wordy, although it is almost universally said to demonstrate a high level of writing ability despite its density. To this day, the Urantia book remains much debated, with its original author completely unknown, its unconfirmed history, and the identity of the supposed original channeler of it all completely a mystery. It has been called royal agreement, a message of divine inspiration from higher forces, as well as a piece of fiction or even a total hoax or propaganda made by humans, perhaps even Sadler himself, with much of impossibly plagiarized by others' construction. So what are we dealing with? A divine compilation of universal secrets bequeathed to us by forces beyond our comprehension, or a collection of absurd ramblings written by false prophets, charlatans, and fraudsters? Whatever the case, it is certainly a strange odyssey nonetheless.